Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to you, wherever you are in the world. I am Tigress Osborn. I am the Executive Director of NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. Those of you who are regulars for the NAAFA Webinar Series will know that I usually, at this point, point to the logos on my wall behind me. But today I am coming to you from New York City instead of from my normal location. So I didn't put the logos on the wall here. But we are so happy to be with you today and have you with us. We are joined today by our special guests, Jae'lynn Chaney and Unique Gibson, who are going to be talking about SuperSize travel in all kinds of different ways today. Before we get started with Unique and Jae'lynn, just a couple of announcements. For those of you who are new to the NAAFA Webinar Series or new to NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance was started in 1969, and our mission is to change perceptions of fat and to eliminate size discrimination. We work towards that mission by doing education, by doing advocacy, and by doing support. Community events like this that allow us to gather in community in this virtual space, learn from each other, share things with each other, and just be together are one of the ways that we do the education, the advocacy, and the support. We are a mostly volunteer-run organization, and we are a donor-funded organization. So we are able to bring events like this to our community through the support of folks just like you. If you get something out of this webinar and you're able to, we hope that you will donate towards future webinars or towards any of our other programming. You can do that at our website at NAAFA.org. We also have a couple more virtual events coming up this month and a few more coming up before we wrap up 2024. And of course, we'll be finishing out the year with our year-end fundraiser, which you'll learn about later this month. If you're not already getting communications from us, you can sign up for our newsletter at the NAAFA website, or you can follow us on your favorite social media at NAAFA Official. Later this month, we will be talking with, later this week, we have our fall virtual brunch, which features our usual brunch crew, Matt and Danielle. Matt Simcoe is our host, and Danielle G from Fashionably Famished is a fantastic food blogger and decor planner, and she'll be sharing some fall tips. We also have a very special belly dance performance by Tammy Johnson. So please do join us for that free event this weekend. And then next weekend, we will be talking with our friends at Little People of America. We're going to get together as two very different kind of body communities and talk about what we have in common and what we don't have in common so that we can all learn from each other. So please do join us for those November events and stay tuned for more coming from us in December so we can wrap up 2024 with a bang. We do just want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is a time when lots of folks have lots of other things on their mind, in particular world events that are happening right now that are causing great concern. Those of us who care about liberation are very interested in what is happening in Palestine and doing some work around that. We are not going to we are going to stay focused on the topic as advertised for today, for this webinar, but we do want you to know that we are working on some other things to help support our community in learning about the situation in Palestine and the genocide in Palestine and what we as a community might need to learn more about in understanding those events and in supporting political action around those events. So you'll be hearing more from us about that. But for today, we are going to focus with Unique and Jae'lynn on SuperSize travel. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's get started with Jae'lynn. Let me introduce you. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, hear a little from each of them, and then we'll get us all in some dialogue together. Jae'lynn Chaney, whose pronouns are she, her, is a plus-size travel expert, activist, content creator, and writer. You may know her as J-Bay across social media. She is currently leading the Body Equality in Travel petition, which she'll tell you more about, where she's advocating for more size-friendly, inclusive travel, particularly in the airline industry. She creates resources for people of size, ranging from where to shop for plus-size clothing to guides on how to navigate travel in a super-sized body. Follow her on Instagram at Jae'lynn Productions and on TikTok and YouTube at Jae'lynn Official. Ladies and gentlemen and friends of all gens, please welcome Jae'lynn Chaney to the NAAFA Webinar Series. Jae'lynn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to talk about everything today.
It is fantastic to see you. So let's start with your origin story. What are you up to these days? We heard a little bit about it in your bio. What else are you up to? And and how did you get to the point where you were doing all these things that you are doing in Fat Community today?
Yeah, so right now I'm focused on the plus size travel petition, the body equality and travel campaign. And that's something that I've been really focusing on, trying to work on some legislation a little bit, getting feedback from the community, gathering data from our community and different things like that. I also have a bunch of projects I'm working on for Fat Community, and I'm just very excited to be here. How I got started was I actually started my blogging journey in 2019. That's when I became a content creator. But I've been in a super fat body for several years now. And the first time that I got on a plane and realized, wow, planes are not meant for me or someone my size, I was only 12 years old. I was traveling as an unaccompanied minor and the seatbelt didn't fit. So I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what my options were. I thought they were going to kick me off the plane. Fast forward years later, I was traveling standby as someone in a super fat body. And you really start to realize that there are so many different challenges you face once you get a little bit larger. And so through that, years later, I actually got sick. My life changed. I became disabled and was living in a super fat body. And once I started creating content, I wanted to start traveling again once I got well. And I started researching, and there was very little research for people of my size. There was research for plus size people in general, but when you're super fat, it's a little different, right? So it was very hard to find those resources. When I started finding resources, I wanted to share them with my community. So I began creating content, and very quickly that content went viral. I got a video with 1 million views, and you would think the views had something to do with my passion, but it was actually the comments. Many of the comments were positive, very supportive, thanking me for the work that I was doing in educating our community. But many of them, really showed the perception of fat people in our community and how people, that are not people of size believe we do not deserve the right to travel. That made it very apparent to me that the work that I'm doing is absolutely needed. And that's kind of how I got started.
So if you could tell that 12-year-old Jae'lynn, who was, sitting on that plane afraid because she thought she was going to get kicked off, if you could tell her things that you have learned since then about plus size travel, or even just being plus size, being fat, being super fat, what are some of the things that you would say to 12-year-old Jae'lynn now?
I would tell her that she deserves to travel. She deserves the right to live her best fat life. And just because of her size, it does not mean that she should be excluded from different things, especially travel. Growing up the way I grew up, I didn't think travel was ever going to be an option because I grew up in a very poor household. But then when I became a fat traveler, I realized that really the community and other people don't want to see fat people travel. They tell me every day that we don't deserve to travel, that we should stay home, things like that. So I would really say, stand up for yourself, speak up, educate yourself, and just know that you have rights and you deserve to travel and live your best fat life.
Before we bring Unique into the conversation, will you talk a little bit about the word superfat? I think there are some, we always have a very mixed audience of folks who are really familiar with fat liberation concepts or the language we use in Fat Community, and also folks who are kind of new to this. It might be their first NAAFA webinar. It might be their first time to learn about some of these things. What does it mean to you to call yourself superfat? And why is that your preferred term for yourself?
Yeah, so identity is very important, and being able to self-identify with a group of people I, relate to is very, very important for me. And I think for all of us when we're in this community, and fat community is amazing, but there are different, ranges of fat. And so for me, being in a larger body, being someone who wears a size 6X, I identify as a super fat. And that word makes me feel very comfortable. It makes me feel accepted from my community, and makes me just feel like I have an identity and a shared identity with other people who understand what it's like to live in a larger body. When you're a smaller fat person, which I have been before, there are different things that you do worry about. But when you get to a larger point, there's access issues. There are different things like that you have to really consider. It's no longer about just anxiety. It's about, do you literally fit in different spaces? Are you welcomed in different spaces? Can you access different things? And that's why I use the word super fat. And it's something that has empowered me to be able to identify my size. And there are people that base it off of size specifically. So, 4X or 6X and above. But for me, it's just really about who I identify as. And as my body has changed over time, how I feel like I fit in the world.
Thank you for sharing that. And for folks who are not already familiar with this, I will just tell you that there's a really fantastic essay by Cherry Midnight and Max Airborne about how the term superfat first came to be used at a No Lose conference. And you can find that our friends at No Lose have that essay available on their website at nolose.org. And you can learn about some of the history of that particular term. Unique, let's bring you in. Let me give folks a little intro to you, and then I want you to talk about the term supersize and especially SSBBW. Unique Gibson, whose pronouns are she, her, is the founder and event coordinator for Juicy Peach's SSBBW events in Atlanta, Georgia. She is committed to empowering the super plus size community to live life in the now rather than putting off enjoying life until after significant weight loss. One of her favorite phrases is, "You ain't got to lose weight to be great." Unique coordinates events, activities, and vacations that are inclusive of all sizes and abilities. The cornerstone of these activities is concierge accessibility services, which we're going to learn more about from Unique later, that ensure everyone enjoys themselves comfortably. You can follow Unique on Instagram at Juicy Peaches ATL, YouTube, Juicy Peaches SSBBW events, and Facebook, Juicy Peaches SS BBW. Unique, before we hear your origin story and how you got here, let's talk about SSBBW and what that term means and what it means to you.
Okay, absolutely. I honestly identify as a USSBBW. It's an ultra size SSBBW, and that was a term from the Dimensions magazine many years ago, for those who were 500 pounds and above. I am over 500 pounds. I'm only 5'3", and my best friend says that my height is in my width. So we joke about that a lot, but I use the term SSBBW because I come from a time when we were never, big fat people were never beautiful, that the world accepted everybody is beautiful but us. And so when I hear a term that talks about not only being this size, but also beautiful, it makes me feel good. And so that's the term that I identify with, because it's always the way that I have felt personally about myself. And so I was always really thankful to hear that others thought that we were beautiful, and it wasn't just in my mind. And I think that a lot of times society still beats us down and makes us hate ourselves and our bodies, and wants us to believe that we're undeserving and unworthy and not pretty enough or not enough. And so I assert the SSBBW term, but I also appreciate all of the others and the way that everybody can embrace who they are and what feels good to them in this umbrella of size in our community.
Thank you for sharing that. So as you know, folks, we at NAAFA use the word fat. It's right there in our name. It has been since NAAFA was founded. And we use that word intentionally and enthusiastically. We believe that using the word fat helps to destigmatize the word, but we also know that it is a word that comes with a lot of trauma for many people. And so first of all, please take care of yourself in this space where we will be using that word a lot. If it is we hope that you can hear it and feel it, and see it in the chat as a term of affirmation. But if it is a difficult word for you, I encourage you to take good care of yourself. We will be using that language today. And I also encourage those of you who are here with us live to share thoughts, if you have them, about the terms that you prefer. We are focusing today on folks at the largest end of the fat spectrum. So whatever fat you are, or if you are here as an ally, we're going to concentrate a lot of our discussion and the tips that we share specifically on people who are at the largest end of the spectrum. There are more and more resources available for plus size travel than there ever have been before, but some of them do kind of max out. So as we talk about some of these things, we may be referring, as we have already, to specific sizes, specific weights, specific measurements. So just be forewarned that there will be some discussion of those specifics in this conversation as well. Unique, tell us a little bit more about how you got to be doing the work that you are doing today.
Oh, absolutely. Next week, I'll be 53 years old. But a few years ago, I was struggling at 48. My mom passed at 48. She died very young. And a lot of the reason why she died so young is that she gave up on healthcare because of the bias in the health community. She had the weight loss surgery many years ago, lost a good deal of weight, but gained it back, died at over 600 pounds. But it was because she just stopped going to the doctor, was self-medicating. And when I thought back at 48 and I developed anxiety and was just hopeful that I would get through or get past 48, I kept thinking about the experiences and the lack of experiences that I had with my mom. The experiences that my kids say, Mom, remember when we were at this place? And remember when we were on vacation? And I didn't have those with my mom. Everything we did was at our home. She was a great cook and she was a wonderful decorator. And she would decorate all of the parties and celebrations. And my brothers were heavy into sports and she never attended a game. But it was all because of the logistics. And I remember I'm the only girl. And so I just thought at the time as a teenager and young adult that I was having conversations with my mom when she would say, "Hi, how was it? And how were the seats? And were you able to fit? And did you have to walk a long way?" And I would, talk about the concert and the event or whatever it was and didn't think anything about it. And later when I realized that every time I'm out, it's just me. I'm the biggest one in the room all of the time. And I'm thinking, where's everybody else? And where's all of my people? Where are my sisters? Why are they not out? And it's because of the logistics. And it's those things that I would worry about and try to find out as much as I could before I got there. I later realized that's what my mom was doing. And that's why she wasn't going out, because of the fear of the unknown. And so I said to God, I said, if you let me get past 48, if I can make it to 49, I'm going to make a difference. And I'm going to make sure that nobody else's moms or parents is sitting on the sidelines of their children's lives, is missing out on these awesome experiences because of the logistics. I'll go to the places. I'll find out if the seats are going to accommodate us. I'll see how many stairs. I'll make sure that we can get out and we can enjoy each other. And it won't just be me. I won't be the biggest one there. And not because I care to be, but because everybody else is missing the concerts and the events and the fun. And when I started Juicy Peaches in Atlanta and the women started coming, and I kept hearing from them that they haven't been out of the country. Nobody has a passport. Some people have not been out of the state that they lived in. I said, I got to do more. I've got to do better. And when they were looking at me and said, I can't believe that you were on the plane. I thought you were going to drive there. And then I said, I've got to teach them that there is a way that you can get there and that we might have to put some work in, but it's important. And so I teach a class about flying as a passenger of size, got a support group behind it. And it's just to make sure that we know that we can fly. And for Jae'lynn at 12 to be in that position, scared and alone and thinking she's going to be put off the plane, I would never have wanted her to be there. But I also don't want the 40-year-old mom who's trying to get to their son's military graduation to feel the same way either.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that example, because I find that sometimes when we start talking about plus size travel, we're really focused on the joyful parts. And it is really important. We are big believers in celebrating fat joy at NAAFA, and we want fat people to have the same right to fun excursions as everyone else. But also, travel is part of work. Travel is part of, family responsibilities. Travel, people are traveling for everything from, their jobs to their, loved one's funeral. So it's not just a matter of us having a good time. It's also a matter of us being able to use this really important system that is important, to our lives in many, many other ways. Let's talk about some of those specifics, some of the tips that y'all have to share, or the things that you've learned along the way. Jae'lynn, what's the first time you remember having a really good travel experience in a plus size body? And what were some of the markers? What were some of the things that people did right or that you did right to make that happen?
Yeah, so one of my favorite experiences, I was able to actually fly to Puerto Rico, and I was able to get first class. And at that time, the first class seats worked for me, and I was able to sit comfortably, and I had a great experience, and the flight over was great. I had no anxiety after, getting warmed up and everything and going at my own pace, and the flight attendants were respectful that time around, which doesn't always happen, but it can make a really big difference. And so, having those experiences were, very different for me. And, treating myself to luxury, right? I think as fat people, we often don't treat ourselves to luxury sometimes, or we don't have the ability to experience things like that, but it can make a difference. And that trip was something I'll never forget. Our final destination was Barbados, and is one of my favorite trips of all time. And I just think back on it and think about how it went well. And I advocated for myself. I needed wheelchair assistance. I asked for it. I needed, a seatbelt extender. I asked for it. And I didn't feel guilty or, nervous or anxious. I just let myself be, because I deserved that trip. And I had just graduated college, and I wanted to celebrate with my loved one. And, we had such an amazing time. And research helped tremendously. And that's something that I do a lot of. And not a lot of us have that time to do that. And that's why when I do the research, I try and share whatever I learn with our community, so that people feel empowered, educated, and they know that they can do it. And, now I get so many questions from people like, oh, how did you do it? Or can you help me ease my mind before I go? And, the biggest tip I give is research, 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 because if you know, and you're not afraid to ask those questions, like, is there weight capacity? Am I going to be able to fit in the harness on the excursion? Do I need to buy a second seat? What size seats do the first class, have? What are the dimensions of those seats? Things like that. Feeling empowered through education is something that's helped me as a fat traveler.
Unique, what about you? What's a favorite or one of your first really magical trips, and what was right about it? What were the things that were done that made it more accessible and welcoming for you?
The one that came to mind is when I got out of my own way, when I started to say, let me stop thinking about what everybody else is thinking. I remember going through the airports and trying to keep up with everybody, and they're walking fast and I'm walking fast. And before I get halfway down, I'm out of breath and I almost need to grab something to hold on. But I don't want them to think that this fat girl can't walk or she can't keep up. And it really didn't matter, because nobody was paying attention to me. And so after getting to where I got and was out of breath and falling into a seat, and then not even sure if I could get up to get on the plane after that, it just took me a couple times to just say, let's ignore everybody else. And I gave myself this idea. It's almost like when you're driving to work, or maybe you're going to Target and you're driving and you're not in a hurry, but somebody comes behind you and they're rushing and they're trying to figure out, well, that person may have one last time to get to work late before they get fired, and they had to take their kids to school. So they're in a rush. Target's going to be there. And I had to tell myself the same thing. Somebody else is running for their plane. They got to get there. Some people just walk really fast. Walk at your pace. Do whatever you got to do. Take some time. If it's too much, go sit down at Burger King. Have a seat. Get back up and then go. And once I was able to talk myself through that, then I was fine. And I remember getting to the gate and not being so out of breath because I paced myself, because I had stopped, because I went to the bathroom, I got freshened up, and I got there and I was fine. So by the time I got to the plane and on the gate, I said, can I have a seatbelt extender, please? And I was just so excited, not speaking lowly, but excited to be there and realizing that I had just as much right to be there as everybody else. And once I got that in my head, there was no stopping me from that point.
So where did you go on that trip? Let us just have a moment to envision you enjoying that trip. Where did you go? What was the trip like?
Well, I met a brother on the internet, and he bought me some tickets to come see him. And I was going to see him. He was in medical school at the time in Virginia. And so I was leaving from Chicago and going to Virginia to see that handsome young man. Mm-hmm. And that trip just was great. It was a great trip. Not because he was great, he was. It was because I got the confidence and the assurance that I needed in myself, that I deserved to be there. And I also made myself understand that I think we're innately people watchers. And so sometimes we just think everybody's watching us because of our size, when everybody's just watching people. And I sit down and wonder where these people are going, if they're going to Virginia or if they're going to have a layover. And it's the same as other people. So all of the nervousness I had about looking a specific way when I, got off the plane because everybody was going to be watching, I realized that everybody has that anxiety because everybody's watching when you're getting off the plane. And so once I figured that out, it was smooth sailing from there.
So what advice do you have, both of you? We'll start with you, Unique, and then Jae'lynn will hear from you. What about the times when there really is an issue? It really is somebody who is watching you to harass you or to make fun of you or to assert why you shouldn't be in this space because they think it's inconvenient for them. How have you had those moments, and how have you handled those moments?
I haven't had a moment where somebody just told me I wasn't supposed to be there. But I had an awkward moment, probably more for her because I'm from Chicago and just a tad bit ghetto, where I had purchased 2 seats on Southwest, and per the protocol, you're supposed to take the additional seat ticket and put it in the seat so someone knows that. However, my hips are 94 inches, so I was in most of that side of the seat, so I don't know that she saw the ticket or even knew what it meant. And so as the plane is filling, I'm in my seat, I've got my extender, and I'm just kind of waiting for wheels up. And this woman comes and she's, I guess I'll have to squeeze in this seat. And I turned and looked at her, and my ticket is there, and she goes to wiggle in, and I said, no, ma'am, you don't have to. This is my seat. And she said, you can't have both seats. And I said, I can. I paid for both seats. They're both mine. It's one person per seat. I said, ma'am, you don't make the rules. I purchased both seats. They're both mine. You'll find somewhere else to sit. And it's upsetting. She goes to get the flight attendant, and the flight attendant comes back with her and sees the ticket and just kind of ushers her down the way. And the gentleman who was on the edge, the end, said to me, I'm so glad that you did that. She was a rude bee. And I said, I'm so glad she just kept walking, so we didn't have to have anything further.
So she didn't have to be full Chicago.
Exactly, because she would have got it. But I think that I understand the stories, and I know that experience was just one, and it was mild in comparison to what others go through. But my prayer, and as I continue to just talk to people about traveling, is that we eventually have to thicken up our skin and be able to stand up for ourselves. And that's just the only way. I don't know that Jae'lynn may have a different way. I don't know that there is a way around it. You got to stand up for yourself. You got to realize that we deserve all of the awesome experiences that come with travel, and not just, like you said, for vacation, but for work, but for living, but just to be outside. We deserve the same experiences, and nobody has a right to keep them from us. And we should never feel bad about, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, about asking for an accommodation. The reality is the travel industry should be ashamed when we have to ask for the accommodation, because it should be inclusive of all. Everybody deserves a right to be traveling and to enjoy their life.
Well, and I want to go back to a little bit more about the specifics of Southwest and their policy, because it is pretty unique in the travel world. But I want to hear Jaelynn's answer to this question first. Jae'lynn, what advice do you have, or what have you learned for yourself about what to do in the times when people are rude or hostile to you around the space that you are taking up as a traveler?
Yeah. So just like Unique said, you have to use your voice. You have to say something and stand up for yourself. And I know that can be so difficult. I struggle with it quite a bit still. But it's reminding yourself that you deserve to be there. And when fat people use the word deserve, people get really, up in arms about it, but we deserve to travel. And sometimes travel isn't for leisure. Sometimes it's for medical things. Sometimes it's for work. Sometimes you have to go see a family member. You deserve to be there. And what if the option isn't there to drive or to take a different, route or a different approach? And just being able to speak up for yourself and say something and give feedback. That's a huge thing for me, is like, give the person feedback. Sometimes you have to educate someone, and sometimes If it's too hostile, don't do what's best for you. But use that moment to educate them on how people of different sizes exist. We always have, we always will, and we deserve to be there comfortably. And, we get this one life, right? And so at the end of the day, if I hold myself back and I don't go to do the trips, go for different opportunities for work or anything like that, I'm missing out. And that's not fair to me. And that's not fair to my loved ones. And that's not fair to us as a community. And so educating, using your voice, advocating for yourself is so incredibly important in whatever form that takes. And, also want to touch on, travel looks different for all of us, no matter what body size we're in, it's going to look different. And sometimes that getting there it can be very difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it's always a great experience when you're a super fat person. There are times that I've been extremely uncomfortable. There are times I've, felt that my health was at risk on the plane. I've had, people that I know in super fat bodies have actual medical emergencies because of the limited space on planes. And so just advocating, using your voice and telling people what you need and educating if you can, or if you feel comfortable with that, so that hopefully they will be more understanding the next time they encounter someone of size.
Yeah. Well, and I also want to add that I would encourage folks to think about following up with the airline, because even if the incident was not caused by airline staff, there are things that airline staff could do to intervene in positive ways that they often do not do. There are things that they could do to follow up to ensure that everybody is safe and comfortable and taken care of that they do not do. And so we it's when Jae'lynn talks about like educating people and helping people learn, when you have the bandwidth to do it, following up with the airline is a really useful thing. Something else that I know I have seen people really benefit from, and maybe folks want to talk about this in the chat, and maybe Jae'lynn and Unique have some thoughts about this. Participating in plus size travel groups, even when they are not focused specifically on supersize travel, can at least get some affirmation, can get some questions answered. And if you have one of those moments where you do have a difficult time for some reason, they can provide some really good concrete suggestions for follow-up, but they can also just provide some of that community love that you need to be reminded to get back out there. Do you two participate in any of the online travel? I know, Unique, your organization has an online group. And what are some of the other ones that y'all participate in or that you have benefited from in the past?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a part of the Traveling Well Plus Size Facebook group. It has almost 90,000 members, and I see so many helpful posts in that group every single day. Even for someone who's educated themselves as much as possible on fat travel and the different things that go into it and planning and preparing, seeing that group, people will lift each other up. They'll share their experiences, and through those experiences, we're able to kind of figure out how to go about something the next time. And Fat Girls Traveling is another great group. There's Fat Girls Travel too. There are so many great groups out there that really provide that support, the advice, the encouragement. I see so many people post, "I'm scared to go on my first trip. Can y'all give me some encouragement?" And people will flood the comments with positivity and experiences they've had and things they got to experience and accommodations that were made for them when it comes to excursions or, doing different activities.
Jae'lynn, will you talk a little bit about Southwest customer of size policy and how it is also related to your airline travel petition?
Yeah, so the Southwest customer of size policy is phenomenal in my opinion. That policy is specifically for people who need additional space when they're on a flight, whether that be because of your body size, your ability level, whatever it is. If you need an additional seat, they will provide you one either for free, or you can purchase it to secure your seat ahead of time and be reimbursed after you get, to your destination. You can go to the ticket counter, get a refund for that second seat, and it really helps offset that disproportionate cost that fat travelers, especially super fat travelers, face because of having to purchase additional seats. And because of this policy, it really inspired me to create my plus size travel petition and the body equality in travel, campaign. And I'm advocating so that we can start seeing, policies like the Southwest customer size policy be implemented in many different airlines so that and even honestly in a global or at least national level, I would love to see that. That's what I'm really dreaming up. And so, to provide that extra space, but also be comfortable and not be, having to pay such a disproportionate amount to people in straight size bodies.
And our assistant, Julianne, is here today working hard behind the scenes. Julianne, would you please drop the link for Jae'lynn's petition in the chat for folks who are here with us live? And we'll make sure that it goes in the caption for those of you who are watching this on YouTube. Just a little bit of history around that policy. A lot of people don't know that it was sort of a lot of different collective efforts that led to that policy at Southwest. What's most famous is some really big media attention that happened in the early days of Twitter when actor and director Kevin Smith got told that he could not stay on a plane because he was too big for one seat. And he started tweeting about it. And it was sort of one of those early stories of Twitter activating people. Mm-hmm. But there were also protests at LAX with members from the LA chapter of NAAFA at that time, protesting at the airport to get Southwest's attention to have better policies. There were people who tried to sue Southwest around the same time as that customer of size policy was implemented. Southwest policy is really unique. You can find it on their website. All the things that Jae'lynn just outlined, but any other information that you need. It is really unique. Alaska Airlines has also implemented a similar policy very recently, and there's not a lot of this in the airline industry. The airline industry defines your space as the space between the two armrests on a plane. And if you cannot fit that space, you are required to buy a second seat, or you are sometimes not allowed to board the plane. And so Southwest does have the best policy in the industry. It doesn't mean that you are protected from other customers' reactions, as we've heard about, but it does at least ensure you some ways of getting the space that you need. We tend to focus a lot on the airline industry when we talk about travel, because it's one of the most contested spaces. It's one of the places where people get the most upset when we ask for what we need. But Unique, your concierge service really helps people with a lot of the other kinds of spaces while they're traveling. So folks, if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat while Unique answers this one. Unique, tell us a little bit about the concierge service at Juicy Peaches when you all do your travel excursions, and why it's necessary, what kind of things they do.
Oh, absolutely. And I wanted to just speak really quickly, just to touch back on what you were talking about with Southwest. Southwest policy has evolved as well. There used to be a time when they would refund, you'd have to purchase the second seat. They would refund it. If the plane wasn't full, then you would get your refund. And now it has evolved that you don't even have to purchase the second seat. You can just come in and ask for it. And so you're right. And when you say that they're truly unique, Alaska Airlines has a similar policy, but Southwest is by far the most size-friendly airlines that I've encountered. And so I'm always singing their praises and am with Jae'lynn on everything that she's doing to try to get other airlines to follow suit. The concierge.
If you get a second seat on Southwest without purchasing it, if that flight is full, that means they have to ask somebody else to give up their seat. That person is well compensated for that. Mm-hmm. So if that is part of your concern, if you are not able to afford to purchase a second seat in advance, just know that if someone is asked to give up a seat so that you have the space you need, they get something for that. They're not just bumped off the flight, right? And so you can weigh that out for yourself in terms of how you feel about that. But if you do purchase the seat, then you are guaranteed to have a seat without having to go through that. But there, it is the only airline that really offers a recourse for what if I can't afford to purchase a second seat in advance. So and thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so let's hear about the concierge.
Absolutely. The concierge services that we provide, I'm very proud of. And it's just, again, my commitment to being the change that I want to see in this world and to making sure that we are able to get out. A lot of us who are traveling in these supersized bodies may be worried about all kinds of things. Am I going to be able to walk on the cruise? You don't have to. Where do I get a scooter from? How do I even say to them that I need one that's over 450 pounds? How do I get those words out of my mouth without shutting down and calling it all off? And so our concierge service is to provide everything that you need up front to make sure that you have what you need. It's also about asking the questions. We have different body shapes. Jae'lynn and I may be similar in size, but I've got more hips. She may have more belly. That's going to mean that these different seats in different areas may work. What may work for her may not work for me. And so not everybody, not every travel agent is going to ask those questions because they, one, don't even know that it matters, the difference in the body type. But others is because it's a sensitive topic. I can ask the questions to make sure that I get a full picture of who's traveling, what their needs are, and make sure that we have those things in place. If we've got your plane, we're going to ask for the wheelchair assistance. If you've got a scooter, I know which, if you can have a lithium battery scooter. If I've got to get you one, a rental when you get there. If you've got to get a Hoyer lift so that you can get out of here, let me get those taken care of for you. If you need an oxygen tank, we'll take care of those. So whatever the needs are, it's making sure that we get those taken care of so that you can travel seamlessly. If you've got to get off and you need an Uber, which states have the Ubers that have the wheelchair assistance vehicles that you can get in? Or do I need to get a private service? And it's just me making sure that we take care of all of the things that are keeping people from going outside of their home. These are things that we can take care of, and I say it all the time. We can do it. And if there's some things I haven't done, then I'm happy to make the call to see what it is that we can do. And so those things are important for our vacations for Juicy Peaches, but also for others who just want to travel. Like you said, I've got to go somewhere for work. They've called everybody in the office. I've been putting it off, but I can't put it off longer. Well, here, let me help you to get there. Let's make this as easy as possible, but also know that travel is work. And I say to everybody that I prepare for it like I'm preparing for a marathon, to make sure that I'm getting my body in its best shape, because there are going to be some twists and turns along the way, and I got to be ready for it. And so I try to make sure that we're drilling those things in too, that this month before you travel, you got to start doing things that are going to help prepare you for it. Even if it's just lowering your sodium intake so you don't have so much swelling and your body is feeling better, as you're moving around. Whatever it is, let's talk about it and let's get you to the right shape so that you can have the best experience. And I cannot always promise it's going to be a great experience, but it'll be better than it would have been had you not been prepared.
Right, right. Well, and we have a question from the chat. We have a couple questions in the chat, actually. First of all, do you have any tips for Superfat international travel? Tina says, I usually dehydrate myself for a flight within the continental US because the bathrooms are so small. But I worry about an 8, 10, 12 hour plus flight, especially one with no kind of layovers and no opportunities to get off the plane and use the bathroom off the plane. What about international travel?
Yeah, so I can step in here. For international travel, what I try and tell a lot of people is that there are different requirements for planes when they're, going across the country or across into different countries. And so many times there will be a wheelchair accessible lavatory on a wide body aircraft. And you can kind of get, a feel for the plane you're going to be on by using Seat Guru. That's something I really recommend any fat traveler use, but especially if you're a super fat traveler, it can be very, very helpful. When it comes to the wheelchair accessible lavatories, they have about 2 times the space of a typical lavatory on a plane. Mm-hmm. And that way you can, use the lavatory while you're there and use it comfortably. What I also recommend is familiarizing yourself with that plane as soon as you step foot. Kind of talk to the flight attendants, see what they recommend, where those wheelchair accessible lavatories are, if they have one, and just let them know ahead of time that you're going to have to use that restroom, even if it's not in your section of the plane.
Absolutely. I was going to say what Jae'lynn said about Seat Guru is very, very helpful. The wheelchair accessible lavatories are a godsend, and especially for travel. I try to limit my international travel to at night. So because at night I'm generally sleeping, I'm not one that gets up most times to use the bathroom, and it gives me a better chance. If you are someone that's getting up during the night, I don't want to say dehydrate yourself, because you definitely want to be hydrated. But if you start to position yourself in your marathon preparation for longer bathroom breaks so that your body is used to it, and now you can go a little bit longer on the way.
Do you have other tips for international travel that are not related to the flying part?
Yeah.
Is there anything, what's unique about being a supersized person in another country versus our experiences? Folks, we know some of y'all will have dialed in from other parts of the world, but NAAFA is based in the US and most of our audience is based in the US. But for anybody traveling outside of their own home country, are there special things you need to know as a super fat person going through customs? Are there things you need to know about how hotels are different, like other international tips?
Yeah, so I would say definitely familiarize yourself with the transportation. Also, the outlook of fat people in that country can be very helpful. So, looking online, using those resources like the fat traveling groups that are on Facebook, just trying to figure out what it's going to be like, what other fat people have experienced, and they will have tips and tricks to kind of navigate that. Really familiarizing yourself too when it's a good time to be traveling, if during the night, if you shouldn't be out, you just want to know those things before you go.
Absolutely. And I think that just as Jae'lynn mentioned, just understanding the culture of the climate, the culture and the climate of the country that you're going to. Hotels are going to be a bit different in terms of sizes. There are a lot of bathrooms now that have those little cubbies, I guess you'd say, that the toilets are made in the cubbies. And so if you're wider, you're going to be looking for those and just trying to make sure wherever possible, if they have accessible rooms. I always ask for the accessible room because it's going to give you more space. It doesn't always accommodate everything, but you are going to have a bit more space. You may get a bathroom that doesn't have the walls so that you're not, figuring out how to maneuver within them. And it also gives you showers that you can actually use and move around it. And so I always ask for accessible just because of my size, whether you have a mobility issue or not. The additional space is going to be helpful. You should always be looking at the transportation, as Jae'lynn mentioned, because transportation is going to be different. Some of the vehicles are a lot smaller. And then some of the ones, if there's hotel transportation, the vans may be really high for you to step into. And so you want to be making sure you're asking those questions. Or again, the travel groups are very helpful because there are people who have traveled, but I also offer the concierge service for international travel. And I can ask the questions, get the photos ahead of time. What I've been successful with, a lot of airlines have been able, if you write them ahead of time and ask for photos of the bathroom, they can provide those. And so you've got to sometimes do some research, but the answers are there.
What about ground travel things for supersized folks? Taking buses, taking trains, renting cars, any particular tips for ground travel?
Yes. So for me, one of the biggest tips is you don't want to bring your own seatbelt extender for a plane, but you do want to bring one for the car, right? If you're going to be using rental car services, you want to make sure you can actually use your rental car and do it safely. Different things you want to take into consideration are also, if the trains that you're going to be on, can you get a second seat? Do you need a second seat? Do they have upgraded tickets that will provide more space that are a little bit less expensive? Some of those things are really important.
Absolutely.
Anything to add to that, Unique?
Yeah.
Sorry, anything you want to add, Unique?
That's okay. Just to say basically, especially when you're renting a vehicle, to understand what the fleet is. And you can look and find out what the fleet is and what the options are going to be to see if it's going to work for you. As Jae'lynn said, we cannot take a seatbelt extender on a plane. It is not allowed, but it is in a vehicle, and you want to make sure that you have that. Also on trains, and most of the European trains, and there are other countries that on their trains, they do have handicap accessible cars. And so if you're asking for those or those services, it is going to be beneficial. I have ridden Amtrak here in an accessible, and it was phenomenal in terms of the ride. The bathroom was huge. I could have taken a shower in there. There wasn't a shower, but it was just that big. And the accessible car has reclining seats that I was able to use to help to keep the swelling off my feet. So if you have a way to ask for accessible, ask for it. It's definitely going to be helpful.
And I'm seeing a couple of good tips in the chat, and I know we have to wrap up soon. So I just want to shout out a couple of things in the chat for folks who are seeing this in the recording. One person mentioned that sometimes you can use pads, either the incontinence pads or menstrual pads or whatever are available to you, diapers, that any of those kinds of things to help assist you in stretching between your bathroom breaks if you. And you might be surprised at how accommodating the size of some things like adult diapers are. So like you can consider those options. Don't be ashamed to consider those options. You can also, Anthony points out that at some Amtrak stations, especially in the Northeast, you can ask to board the train earlier, so you have a little bit more time to move around and take your time getting on. There's also mentioned of, trying out the cars ahead of time if you're renting cars so that you can make sure it's not always the car that looks like the biggest bodied car. That's the one that's going to have the most space inside for you. Our friend Kaya Milstein at Mechanic Shop Femme also is a car expert who knows lots of things about big bodied cars and what's best for big folks. So you can always look to her for some advice about ground transportation stuff as well, even though she's not a travel expert. I want to make sure that we have time to give y'all some final thoughts, but this was the last question from the chat. Someone DM'd me this question, just wanting to know if you think that a SuperSize travel and the way other customers interact with you is different for, depending on your gender. Do you notice that people get harassed differently or treated differently because they are a larger person in particular genders versus others?
Absolutely. I think that society in general is a lot harder on women than they are men, just for the masculinity part of it, or the fear that they're going to be met with the same level of hostility and aggression. And that's why I say we got to get thicker skins so that we can be meeting them with the same kind. What you give me, I'm going to give you back, especially if you're trying to impede my travel and my life. And for so many of us, we're just trying to live. We're trying to enjoy our life. We're not looking for any foolishness. We just want to be left alone. And that can be just very devaluing when someone comes with these sick comments and so I understand the not wanting to, to push back or just wanting to be left alone. But there's only so much of that you can do. You got to stand up for you.
Jae'lynn, any thoughts on gender and SuperSize travel?
Yes, in my experience, my partner, who's assigned male at birth, they have experienced actually way more discrimination towards them than I have. And I believe that's just because people are a little bit more willing to be confrontational with someone that's assigned male at birth. And that's just my experience. And I just feel I haven't had as many of those very in-my-face discriminatory experiences while on planes as my partner has.
That's really interesting. I've observed a little bit of the opposite, which is that folks who are perceived to be men, whatever their gender identity is, sometimes people are too intimidated to be as harassing to them as they are to people who are perceived to be women. But of course, with all of these things about travel, if you are from another marginalized identity, depending on your race, depending on your gender, depending on your sexual orientation, there may be particular reactions that people are having to that other identity or to the combo of your body size and that identity. So another really great place to seek out advice in those travel groups from people who share your identities, especially, in places that you are unfamiliar with. What was their experience like? It might be a very different thing to be a fat Black femme in a place than it is to be a fat white femme in a place, or, be a Latinx man in a place than it is to be a Black man in a place, or whatever the case may be, right? And so make sure you're thinking about those questions as well. I'm going to just want to say a thank you to our hardworking interpreters from Pro Bono ASL, who I forgot to introduce you to at the beginning of this session, but who've been here this whole time, helping make this session more accessible for folks. Today we had Amber with us and we had Junie with us. Please support Pro Bono ASL in their work. And please know that when you give to NAAFA, it helps fund Pro Bono ASL. We do pay our interpreters so that they have the opportunity to offer those pro bono services to others who have more need. So please, please do support our continued webinars, our continued work with Pro Bono ASL, and our other virtual events. If you have any last suggestions you want to drop in the chat so that we can include them in our resource document, or any last questions you want to drop in the chat, please do that. We won't be able to take more questions on camera, but we will be able to get those answers out in our, via our blog or via our social media. So last call for questions you might have, thoughts you might want to share, best practices you've learned. And real quick, 30 seconds or less, each of you, final thoughts or things we didn't ask you about that you just want to remind people. Jae'lynn, you go first, please.
Yes, just please remember that you deserve to travel. You deserve to live your best fat life, no matter your size. You deserve to have great experiences. Always feel free to reach out to me on social media or in any way I can help you with anything. And I also have a fat travel checklist that I offer that covers many different accessibility things. So check that out.
Unique?
And for me, I would say I would definitely piggyback on what Jae'lynn said, is that you deserve to travel. Don't ever forget that. You deserve the life that you want to live, and there's nothing that should be stopping you. So reach out, lean into the services and to the tips that we have. Know that we are available, and you've got help. You've got a support system. And for those who may not be super fat or fat or even in the larger bodies, we could use your help also by identifying these things when you see them and when you realize that things are not inclusive for everybody. We need more allies to stand up to say that and to help us to sign on to these petitions, to say everybody deserves to have the same life that I'm living. And I want to make sure that I sign my name to it so that we can continue to bring more awareness and hopefully bring about more change.
Yes. So please sign Jae'lynn's petition. Please also sign our petition for the Campaign for Size Freedom. We are working at changing state level laws, especially with a long-term hope of changing federal law to make it illegal to discriminate based on body size. You can find our Size Freedom petition at our website, NAAFA.org. And we need to wrap up so we can let you all move on to the other parts of your day. But thank you so much for being here. Jae'lynn, Unique, thank you for your ongoing work around SuperSize travel and all of the other things that you do for fat community. Thanks again to our friends at Pro Bono ASL and to all our NAAFA team behind the scenes. And thanks to all of you. We saw lots of new names in the chat today. So hopefully you will all sign up for our newsletter and stay tuned. And we'll see you back here on Saturday for our Fat Fall virtual brunch. Or next week for our session with Little People of America. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.